Ahoy Super Squad! Welcome to another Joy Chart video, this time on Super Mario Bros. 3. If you're new to Joy Charts, I think it'll become clear what they are pretty soon, but as a short introduction, a Joy Chart is a unique way to rate the entirety of a game while also allowing us to compare individual parts of it, kinda like a tier list. I'm excited for this episode because Super Mario Bros. 3 is one of those evergreen titles for me. I play through it multiple times a year because I love it so much, and believe me, having so much experience with it means I have some very strong opinions that I want to showcase in this Joy Chart. As always, we need to set up our chart so we can properly rate Mario 3, so let's get right to it and place each individual world as our tick marks for our x-axis. I think that's the cleanest way of rating all of Mario 3's major points because each world is very distinct and complete with their own merits. The y-axis is how we're going to rate each world, and if you're new to the Joy Chart series, I like to do themes for ratings for every video instead of having very standardized ones like bad, good, or great. For Super Mario Bros. 3, let's keep it in-house and use the game's various power-ups as our scale, as requested by one of my good buddies who wanted to see a Joy Chart on this game. I kinda have the tendency to over-explain the rating themes, so if you'd like to skip that and continue where the scoring actually begins, you can jump to the timestamp on your screen. First up, we need to get a new label for our top score, and since we're doing Mario 3 power-ups, there's only one that it could be: the Tanuki suit, aka the teddy bear suit. There's a whole story as to why I call it the teddy bear suit, but here's the short version. As a kid, I thought the Tanuki suit made Mario look like a teddy bear, and the name stuck with me ever since. I love Mario's ability to fly, and it makes Mario look cute as hell compared to the Super Leaf, so it gets to be the top score for our y-axis. Our middle score is going to be renamed to the Super Mushroom, and I think everyone will find that appropriate because the Mushroom power-up has always kind of been the most basic one throughout the series. It's certainly a helpful power-up, but it only lets Mario take an extra hit and grants him no new abilities, so I think it's an appropriate spot for it. And lastly, we need to replace our lowest score, but I'm far less confident in what power-up to assign here because I don't think Mario 3 really has a bad one. If I absolutely have to choose one, I suppose I'll go with the star, cause while it is still great, it's the only time power-up in the game, and it doesn't change up Mario's moveset. Our chart now is fully labeled, so it's time to start rating Super Mario Bros. 3 to see how much joy it brings everyone. First up is a leisurely stroll through World 1, Grassland. Grassland in Super Mario Bros. 3 is an absolutely fantastic introduction to the rest of the game and is one of my favorite collections of starter levels in any game ever. Every stage here is masterfully crafted and fun to play, with maybe the exception of level 5 in my opinion, but even then, you can still find a good time there. The designers did a great job of introducing flying and shell tossing in the very first stage, which is super important since those were the two main mechanics that Super Mario Bros. 3 introduced to the series. And nearly every level in Grassland has some neat trick that's the stuff of playground urban legend. You know, those interesting things that sound too good to be true, those tricks that your friends would talk about that you couldn't believe in the moment, but you'd go home and try them because why not? And then you realize they're real and they're actually in the game. Level 2 allows players to grab dozens of lives with the Goomba stomping trick near the first pipe formation. Level 3 has both the secret white semi-solid platform Mario can crouch on to get behind the scenery and claim the first warp whistle, and it has the first instance of a Coin Heaven secret. Level 4 has the secret P-Wing Mushroom House if players collect enough coins, and the first fortress has one of the most legendary secrets in all of gaming that no one was ever going to find unless a certain family member of a young Fred Savage didn't show us first.
50,207. secret passageway!
That's the magic flute! Use it! It opens the warp!
Remain fire! The warp zone!
Yes! Yes, it's in the warp!
Jimmy Woods, 66,800.
On a completely separate note, if you've never had the chance to watch The Wizard, please do so after this video, because it's amazing how they managed to make a featured-length film into one giant Nintendo commercial. Anyways, back on topic, Grassland has a really nice balance of level types and themes. The difficulty is spot on for the first set of challenges in the game. It has one of my favorite Koopalings with Larry representing the bad guy crew first, and the map theme is low-key a total bop and one of my favorite songs in the entire Mario series. Bonus points for the king transforming into a puppy, because I am all about puppies all the time. Grassland is one of my favorite worlds in Super Mario Bros. 3, and it'll be starting off our joy chart on a very high note. I couldn't decide how close I wanted it to be to the teddy bear suit perfection score, but I ultimately decided to put it 2 tick marks below because I think it's a little too short and it feels a little too introductory, if that makes any sort of sense. If you're judging World 1 on pure game design credentials, I'd argue it's borderline flawless and should get a perfection score. But for casual run-throughs, it's a great starter world that gets outclassed later on, so a few tick marks lower feels appropriate to me. Grab your sunscreen, grab your umbrella, because we're headed to World 2, Desert Land. Desert Land is another really good world, but I do find its set of levels to be a little mixed in terms of quality, though I don't think any of them are outright bad. Let me get one thing out of the way real quick. If you've been following the channel, you know that I am not a fan of desert archetypes in games, and it usually negatively impacts how I feel about those areas. Mario 3 is an exception to the rule. I actually don't mind the desert theming here at all, and I think most levels represent it well. Stage 4 in Desert Land is one of my top 5 levels in the entire game because I love the secret area at the start of the level that requires a leaf. And the Angry Sun is one of the coolest concepts in the entire adventure, even though the stage itself is a little tedious with the wind tornadoes. The Pyramid level is an interesting maze that requires basic mastery of shell tossing, which is neat, but the rest of the levels are only okay in my opinion. I find most of them challenge players by placing intrusive blocks and obstacles to break any sense of pacing, which is a totally fine way of testing players' abilities and precision, but it's just not my favorite way of challenging a player. Stage 2 is probably my least favorite level in this world, and I think it's also one of the best examples of a level that just feels disconnected with blocks. There's just not a whole lot of flow in the set of stages found in Desert Land, you know? Morton being the guardian of this place here also doesn't help because he isn't one of my favorite Koopalings, but his boss fight is a nice step up in difficulty because his jumps can freeze Mario in place. I gotta give Desert Land a shout out though for the awesome Fire Brothers secret in the top right corner that requires a hammer. That's one of the coolest hidden areas on any world map in the entire game. Desert Land is a really good world in Super Mario Bros. 3, but I don't think it reaches as high as Grassland because of some flow and consistency problems. Because of that, I think it's fair to put it 1 tick mark below World 1 on our joy chart. It's a really solid world with no major flaws. It's just not one of my favorites because I find the level design to be a little convoluted in some of the stages. Even under all that sand, it does have some nice hidden gems with a few of the stages and excellent map secret. I've got my flippers and swim trunks ready because it's time to take a trip to World 3, Waterland. Waterland has always been interesting to me because whenever I play it, I feel like the developers must have changed a lot at this point in the game while Super Mario Bros. 3 was being made. I have absolutely no proof of this, but I say that because I find the difficulty of the stages within this world to be a little bit chaotic, and I would also say that the entire package of levels here is actually harder than the world that comes after it. For me, that's okay because I really don't mind any sort of small difficulty spike, but some players might find it a little bit frustrating. That being said, I think it's all good because there are a lot of levels here that are outright great. Stage 3 and Stage 8 are both terrific, and I'm a huge fan of how the developers implemented boss bass as an insta-death mechanic that needs to be avoided. Stages 7 and 9 are both a lot of fun and are some of my favorite levels to experience during the long journey to Bowser. If I recall correctly, Stage 7 actually uses a totally unique visual design for its semi-solid platforms, and it has a few of the lesser-known secrets if you can find a suitable runway to fly. The mushroom houses here drop frog suits for the first time, and while I'm not in love with any of the underwater areas here, the suit makes them so much more palatable than they would be otherwise. I think the bridges on the map that alternate up and down after each level are super cool because they give players momentary opportunities to skip a level by shortcutting paths, and I love the boat that ferries Mario to an island of mushroom houses and spade panels. There's even a really cool Easter egg in this area. Did you know that the chain of islands on the right end are supposed to represent Japan, with the castle being placed in the spot of Kyoto? That metaphorical castle is guarded by Wendy, and her boss fight is one of the more interesting ones in the game because of her signature ring attacks, so there's a lot to love about Waterland. I actually don't think this world has many negative features other than maybe 1 or 2 stages that are a bit subpar, though Hammer Brothers fights that take place on water tiles are basically impossible and they're no fun, but those are insignificant marks on an otherwise great world. Waterland features one of my favorite sets of levels in all of Super Mario Bros. 3, and it's going to be rated just below the top score on our Joy chart. Most players dread water levels and platformers, and I'm no exception unless we're talking about a few select series, but I think Nintendo did an excellent job showing restraint here because despite its name, players only actually spend a small amount of time underwater. Even then, the frog suit does a good job at making those times more enjoyable. It's not quite perfect for me because of the few less interesting levels and the water Hammer Brother fights, but for now, it is the peak in our Joy chart. I hope you were able to cool off nicely after Desert Land because it's time to get out of the sea and make our way to World 4, Giant Land. If the name didn't give it away, Giant Land throws a twist into the way Mario 3's worlds do their theming. Instead of being tied to a type of terrain, World 4 instead runs with a gimmick where blocks, enemies, and objects are all supersized compared to Mario. Giant Land is where the Mario series adopted this concept for the first time, and I love not only it, but almost every stage in this place. Stage 1 is one of my top 5 levels in the game, and it features a unique waterfall mechanic that by itself is only okay, but I bring it up because it creates one of the coolest secret areas that I remember finding as a kid. Stage 6 is also a top 5 level in the game for me because of its neat trick where the level can be played in both regular and giant form. Stage 5 is great with some really cool secrets using the bullet bills, and Stage 2 is always interesting because it reverses the boss bass chasing mechanic from World 3 and it gives Mario the edge. Both fortresses are fun to play, the world has a nicely paced difficulty curve, and the visuals here are just so distinct in theme compared to the rest of the game. There is one water level that does slow the pace a little bit, but I actually think that's one of the more interesting aquatic excursions in the adventure. Whenever I get to World 4, I always make sure I have a hammer ready for that first mushroom house because this is the first time players can get a Tanuki suit, which is my favorite power-up in the game. Iggy is the Koopaling Guardian this time around, and his fight is pretty straightforward, so there's really not much going for him or against him. The only thing that bugs me about Giant Land is its length because it doesn't feature as many stages as World 3 or any of the worlds after it. But that's really the only problem I have with this place. Giantland is the best collection of levels found in Super Mario Bros. 3. It's like a theme park with its oversized gimmick, and it's just a world that I find so interesting and engaging from start to finish. It's easily my favorite world in Mario 3, and I'd argue that objectively, it also features some of the best game design in the entire adventure, so it's time to award our first perfection score on our joy chart and establish a new peak. It's a good thing our joy chart is climbing higher, because it's time to rise up as we make our way to World 5, Skyland. Skyland is super unique because it's 2 worlds in one. The first third of the world takes place in Grassland-like stages, but the rest of it all takes place in the clouds. These 2 areas are linked by a fortress that's unlike any other in the game, and Mario has to pass through it each time a player wants to make their way to one of these areas. That can definitely get a little tedious if players are chasing the airship, but otherwise, it's a pretty cool twist for a world map. Skyland has a lot of levels that I really like, but none stick out more than Stage 3, because it's the only place where players can find Goombas in a Kuribo shoe. It's a fantastic power-up that's really fun to use, and the level itself is one of my favorites, so it's really a shame that the power-up doesn't appear in more stages. The first stage in Skyland has a really cool secret at the start of the level that can be obtained with the leaf, and Stage 2 is cool because it's a stage built vertically that focuses on Mario falling. Level 5 is unique because all of the ground terrain is replaced with falling donuts, and the second fortress is one that always stuck out to me for its difficulty, but in a good way. But unfortunately, for every good stage in Skyland, there's a couple of levels that are just outright terrible, and no surprise, it's because most of these levels are annoying auto-scrollers. Stage 9 and I have some serious historic beef, and it is personal. This stage is the bane of my existence, and it's the digital incarnation of anxiety, but at least a P-Wing can change it to something tolerable and easygoing. Stage 6 requires players to constantly platform on parabeetles with no terrain, and while I don't outright hate this stage, I don't think there are a lot of players who enjoy this massive difficulty spike. Stage 8 is also a less than stellar stage in my opinion, with the Lakitu chasing Mario throughout it, so Skyland definitely has a peaks and valleys thing going on with the quality of its levels. Roy caps off this roller coaster ride with an alright fight that's similar to Morton's, but yeah, as a whole, I just find Skyland to be a world with really interesting ideas, but one that couldn't capitalize on all of them, leading to a little bit of an inconsistent experience. Skyland is the hardest world to place on my joy chart. I could make arguments for a lot of different placements, but I'm gonna match World 1's rating and put it a few tick marks under perfection. I think Skyland suffers a little bit from the designer's ambition, because it tries a lot of new set pieces and mechanics that other worlds just don't feature. Most of them do work well and are fun, but the 2 auto-scrollers up in the clouds are some of my least favorite stages in the game, and they decimate any sort of pacing the world otherwise has. Ambition is almost always a great thing, but it does come with the price of imperfect execution at times. And for me, that's exactly how I would describe Skyland. A world with a lot of ideas, but it doesn't necessarily do them all well. I got my scarf and snow hat ready for our descent back to the ground. Let's head over to World 6, Iceland. I gotta be honest with you guys, I thought about recording this whole next part of the script in an Icelandic accent, but after looking it up on YouTube, I realized very, very quickly that I can't do one, so don't worry, I'll spare you from that torture. Iceland is where Super Mario Bros. 3 really steps up its difficulty and starts to test players' mastery of the game's main mechanics. This world has some of the most well-designed stages in the game that are somehow brutal yet fair, and the designers thought it was wise to throw in some ice physics just to make it even more challenging. I'm actually a pretty big fan of Mario 3's ice physics because they're not too intrusive and overly centralizing, and most of the levels here in Iceland do a great job of making sure that a slightly altered physics engine isn't the reason why players will be dying over and over again. Stage 5 is one of the most memorable places in the adventure with its unique cycle that loops players into a cave until they stop for a moment and realize they have to fly while carrying a Koopa shell to break some blocks that are in the way of the exit pipe. Stage 1 introduces Patuis, which are a really interesting enemy type with fun mechanics, and a lot of the stages here feature ice blocks that can be melted with a fireball, which was genuinely a novel concept and mechanic back in the day. I don't think Iceland features a ton of different stages that I would consider to be amazing individually, but I think it makes up for it with remarkable consistency from level to level. There's really only one stage here that's subpar, and it's the underwater cave found in Stage 6. It feels claustrophobic and slow, and it really doesn't have much going on. Stage 9 is also an underwater cave, but it has a lot more things in it and is overall more interesting. But if you didn't want to play another underwater cave, here's a pro tip. Try using a P-Wing when you enter this level. You'll find a really interesting secret if you just fly high. Players can even find the rarely seen Hammer Brothers suit here for the first time if they have a little bit of luck at the mushroom houses, and Lemmy is my favorite Koopaling and features the best boss fight in the game with his squishy ball attacks, so Iceland always finishes strong before sending players off to the next world. Iceland is my second favorite world in the game, and I'm really unsure if it should be placed at the same level as Giantland or one tick mark lower to match Waterland. At the time of this recording, I'm feeling generous towards it, so let's make it our second teddy bear suit score and regain that upwards momentum in our joy chart. It has remarkably consistent levels, and it does a great job of handling the difficulty curve without relying on cheap ice physics, so it has a lot going for it even though I don't find many of the individual stages to be spectacular. Grab your compass, map, notepad. Yeah, grab a tool of your choice that will keep you from getting lost, because next up is World 7, Pipe Maze. Pipe Maze, much like Giantland, is also a world filled with a unique gimmick that's not tied to any sort of terrain or biome. Several levels in this place are either constructed with pipes instead of normal platforms and blocks, or they use pipes to intricately design mazes and puzzles that have to be navigated in specific ways to complete. Stages 2, 5, and 9 all implement this maze concept very well, and I think it's a neat way of crafting levels because it tests more than just pure platforming abilities. But Pipe Maze hasn't forgotten that players are near the end of the game, because there are several stages in here that require extreme precision and speed to beat, mainly the 2 Piranha Plant stages, Stage 7 and Stage 8. Stage 7 is particularly difficult, since players must be quick enough to chain invincibility stars together, but it's a level I've always enjoyed a lot. The first fortress in Pipe Maze is also a terrific puzzle that requires some thoughtful use of P-switches, and if you're ever low on lives, you can get a ton here by collecting coins over and over again. Stage 4 is the weakest level in the world, but even then, I think it might be the best underwater level in the game, even though it's the unholy combination of being underwater plus an auto-scroller. I don't know how they pulled it off, but it's weirdly fun and it's a great challenge. Ludwig is the last Koopaling that needs to be thrashed, and it's kind of a lackluster fight, but as a whole, Pipe Maze has a bunch of solid levels with a cool world theme, and a few levels that stick out as better than average. And if you ever find yourself in the mood for some jazzy tunes, you can find an awesome remix of this world's theme in Fortune Street. Pipe Maze is another world that has rock-solid consistency with a few showcase levels. I don't think it's quite as consistent as Iceland, so for that reason, let's place it one tick mark lower, below perfection, to match Waterland's score. The world's gimmick is well fleshed out, even though it does get stretched a little thin at times, but the difficulty curve and interesting stages that break from the mold do a good job of keeping things feeling fresh. With all the Koopalings defeated, it's time to grab a flashlight and try and explore Bowser's home turf. The last and final world to rate is World 8, Darkland. Darkland is where Mario 3 comes to a close, and as expected, the levels here are hard. This place is filled with multiple auto-scrolling ships and tanks, and has some levels that are even miniaturized bullet hells where players have to weave Mario in and out of projectiles unlike anything they've seen to this point. While these levels accomplish some well-chosen thematic flair wrapped up in a nice difficulty spike, I find that these levels are way too long and really drag on, which is not what I think the developers wanted this late in the game. There's just a few too many of these auto-scrollers, but I'll give some exceptional credit to the final airship because that might just be the hardest level in the entire game, and it's a really strong platforming challenge. Darkland is supplemented with some more traditional stages that helps it a lot, and I think both of the quote-unquote normal stages are fantastic. Actually, Stage 1 is a contender for my favorite level in the entire game, because I love the unique dark setting for an outdoor level, and the platforming here requires extreme precision while also having some of the best set pieces in the entire adventure. Stage 2 brings back the angry sun, which makes absolutely no sense, but it's awesome nonetheless, and the fortress here is the most complicated maze in the game, which is alright by me. There's also the random hand trap levels, which are short action courses that reward Mario with the leaf power-up upon their completion, and I like how they're short bursts of speedy platforming with some nice rewards. Bowser's Castle itself features a maze-like structure with some nice bits of platforming, and I'm a huge fan of the fight at the end because I like how Bowser himself has to be the one who ultimately leads to his own downfall. Darkland is a real mixed bag filled with all kinds of interesting design choices, and I appreciate how the developers tried some new things at the very end of the game. Darkland is definitely a very fitting final world, I don't think anyone doubts that, but the over-reliance on auto-scrollers that have to be repeated on death kills pacing in a game that otherwise excels at it. Despite having a small collection of great standard levels, this is actually my least favorite world in Super Mario Bros. 3, so I'm going to go ahead and match it with Desertland's score, and unfortunately finalize our joy chart on a bit of a sour note. Even though Darkland is tied for the lowest score on the chart, I do think it's important to point out something critical. I think that the designers made the right choices with the stages they included in this world, because back when NES games without save files were the standard, the design philosophy of the industry was all about that brutal difficulty to encourage repeat playthroughs upon game overs. Games back then couldn't be super long adventures, so length was supplemented by difficulty spikes and repeat trials, so I think it makes a lot of sense that the game finishes with those kind of levels as an artifact from its development period. I just don't think they've aged as well as the rest of the game, so I don't love playing that part compared to the rest of the adventure. To me, that justifies the score I gave it, because Darkland is still an above average and great world, it's just not as good as the other locales Mario visits during his journey. Super Mario Bros. 3 is an absolute masterpiece, and I think our finished joy chart does a really nice job of showing that everything in the game is significantly above average while highlighting some of the truly special parts. Giant Land and Iceland are playgrounds of pure fun, and Waterland and Pipe Maze are also terrific sets of levels that bring some great action. Desertland and Darkland are my least favorite parts of the game, but both of them are still so good that they manage to contribute an above average experience on their own. With the exception of Stage 9 and World 5, which is just pure pain and torture, it is very difficult to find any low points of Mario 3. Let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with my Super Mario Bros. 3 joy chart, and let me know what you think of each world. Thank you so much for watching one of my videos. It really means a lot to me that you're here. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like on it and subscribe to the channel so we can help the Super Squad grow. I like to make content on game design and Nintendo topics, but I do other stuff too, like tier lists, personal stories, and joy charts. I'm on some social media platforms if you'd like to get to know me better, and the links to them will be in the video description. My name is Super, and like me, I hope you'll have the chance to be super today too.